All right, everybody. As you know, we only have taken sponsors for the podcast of products that we actually use, all right? Tax Help Software and ENQ, okay? ENQ is what allows us to call the government and get into the IRS in under 3 minutes. Tax Help Software is what we use to pull transcripts. It's our intelligent ordering where we track what's going on with our clients overnight. So in the morning, we know if anything has happened on the IRS side. And also what we use for our resolution forms, our offers, installment agreements, uncollectible, powers of attorney, all of that, okay? So if you want to go check them out, I will put the links below. If you were to show up at Green and Sklar's and wander around and follow me for a day, that's what we use. We use ENQ to call the government. We use Tax Help Software for basically everything else. Okay, so check them out. They help make this podcast work. And thanks for listening. Joining me on this week's Tax Rep Network podcast to talk about IRS enforcement and John Doe Summonses is Don Fort and Larry Sannicandro, both from Kostelanetz and Fink. Most of you probably know Don Fort. Don is the Director of Investigations at Kostelanetz and Fink LLP and the immediate past Chief of the Internal Revenue Service's Criminal Investigation Division. Having spent nearly 30 years in law enforcement for the federal government, Mr. Fort has deep expertise in financial crimes and has developed an extensive network of connections both within and outside the government. At Kostelanetz and Fink, he now assists clients facing governmental investigations involving all manner of alleged financial and economic crimes, including tax controversies or suspected tax crimes, money laundering, and Bank Secrecy Act violations. Mr. Ford is also involved in conducting internal investigations and advising clients on compliance regimes. He is available as an expert witness for voluntary or court-mandated monitorships. Larry, also many of you know, he is a frequent speaker all over the country as well as at the New England Rep Conference. Larry Sannicandro is a partner at Kostelanetz and Fink and focuses his practice on federal and state tax controversies, including representation in audits, administrative appeals, collection matters, summons proceedings, criminal tax investigations and prosecutions, and litigation in the U.S. tax court, federal district court, and appellate courts. All right. Larry has extensive experience providing tax-related advice with respect to original tax return reporting positions on a broad range of substantive tax issues, amending tax returns, filing and litigating claims for refund, challenging civil tax penalties, and everything about foreign assets and income. And what you probably didn't know is prior to private practice, Larry was actually a tax attorney for the IRS in the estate and gift area. So he has a deep expertise of estate and gift, as well as income tax and all the civil and criminal tax controversy work that he does. All right, guys, listen, thank you. Welcome to the program. I'm very excited to do this, and it's a very timely topic. And so let me just start off. Look, we know about the John Doe summons on Coinbase. That was in 2016. And we know the IRS is using that information in enforcement, both criminal and we've already heard on the podcast earlier, civilly. For the listeners, Larry and Don, can you, who aren't familiar with this, can you explain what a John Doe summons is versus like the normal administrative summons we often see from like a revenue officer or revenue agent?
Yeah, sure, Eric. So you alluded to it exactly, which is administrative tax summons is essentially a demand for documents or testimony by the IRS from a third party. The name of the taxpayer is known, the identity of the taxpayer is known, the identity of the third party is known. A regular administrative tax summons is issued administratively by the IRS, and that's to be contrasted with a subpoena, which is issued by a court. Now, a John Doe summons is an administrative tax summons that seeks information from a third party about a class of people. Right? It doesn't list the name of the taxpayer because the specific identity of the taxpayer isn't known, but it requests information about a class of taxpayers who are under investigation because the class of taxpayer is known to the IRS. The specific identity or specific name of the taxpayer is not known to the IRS.
And so, like, I'm thinking as an example, I believe it was a John Doe summons on UBS, right? All of the United States citizens. So I don't know if it's Don Fort or Eric Green, or I don't have their names, but I'm looking for the U.S. citizens that UBS, the Swiss bank had. We've seen this, Larry and Don, and actually, Larry, you probably have dealt with this. The check cashers in New York. That when the IRS did that, we got a slew of people coming running in. They're being audited. One item, gross receipts.
Sure.
And and so for the listeners, I think that's the difference. Whereas the administrative summonses here, Eric Green, please turn over the following financial records for an audit, or revenue officer for missing returns or whatever. Here it's, we're not sure who they are, but we know you have them. Give us the list.
Exactly right.
And so now that this is public, so, and again, for the listeners who may be listening to this maybe a little bit later, we've had some news break in this area where we know about Coinbase now 4 or 5 years ago, but now we have, I think it's Kraken, Payward Ventures, which is known as Kraken, and Circle Internet Financial. Now both served, both of them, by the way, are virtual currency banks, I guess. Why is this so significant?
Yeah, so I think they refer to them as exchanges, but yeah, I mean, in my mind, and again, drawing on my, I left the government end of September. It's just significant because the IRS has been very vocal. As you said, you've had some IRS speakers on your podcast about, this being an issue of noncompliance, both from the civil and criminal aspects, which just goes to show, even though 3-4 years have passed since the John Doe summons, this is not going away, that the IRS still thinks it's a problem, both from, again, civil and criminal noncompliance.
Well, and I love your thoughts on this. It strikes me similar to, and again, Don, you would know much better because you're in the government. But from my perspective, after 9/11, it took the government a little while, I think, to kind of think through, but you have that, what was a 3-prong, let's try to get our arms around everything approach. So you had Bank Secrecy Act enforcement, FATCA, and FBAR. So you got the taxpayers who had the accounts reporting it. You had banks in the US reporting anything going on. And then you got the foreign countries and their banks on board reporting. And what you're doing, my feeling is you're starting to put up fences around everything. So it's more difficult for criminals. It's not impossible, but it's much more difficult for criminals to move large sums of money without being found out. This, and then when I get to this, kind of feels like, all right, we got Coinbase, let's see what we got, and now we're going to start going after all the others. If we can get to all the exchanges, again, can we start to get, can the IRS and DOJ get their arms around the entire playing field of virtual currency? What I'm wondering, Don, and Larry, if you have thoughts on this, why has it been 5 years? Why has the government waited, since 16 to now go and do this? Do you think this was parsing information?
Well, I think it's a little bit. It's a great question, and I think it's, obviously, the IRS wasn't just sitting on its hands for 4 or 5 years in between the John Doe summons. But I think you're right. Look at how much this space has changed since the Coinbase John Doe summons, right? I mean, it's just rapidly evolving, virtually on a daily basis. So I think that I can say affirmatively, there's a lot of other work going on. It takes a certain amount of time from the time that the case was, that Coinbase agreed to turn all the information over. Then, there's a period of time where the IRS has to decide and coordinate amongst all the divisions, the civil and criminal. What are we going to do about it? What does it mean? How do we reach out to, we can't work if there's 16,000 cases of noncompliance. We don't have that much manpower. So how do we deal a soft hand to some on the one hand? How do we make examples of some of the others on the other spectrum? So that's why you saw, various letters going out to different classes of taxpayers, and different treatment. But a lot of work in between. And remember that John Doe Summons, while an incredibly powerful tool for the government and for the IRS, it's just one tool. So lots of other, they have spoken a lot about, at least in CI, an increase. If you look at the Bank Secrecy Act reporting, an increase in the keywords, cryptocurrency and Bitcoin and things like that. So that's, to an investigator, financial investigator, that's low-hanging fruit, right? BSA reporting and things like that. But there's lots of other, avenues to get information from. BSA 1, you've got informants coming in. You've got a lot of cases that IRS CI has worked that has, really, they've gotten a treasure trove of other information. There's been information about foreign exchanges. And it was interesting, Eric, I don't know if you've seen the government's response to the on the Kraken case, but it's about a 40-page document that lays out, in a lot of ways, it lays out a lot of the government strategy and what they need and what they're trying to do. But it mentions in a couple of spots that they have information from foreign exchanges. And to me, if I was out there and had money on a foreign exchange or on a U.S. exchange, to me that's kind of they're almost giving a roadmap of where they're going in this area. So I think it's just making the point that their efforts are not limited to John Doe Summonses. That's a great tool, but there's lots of other information, lots of other avenues going on there.
Yeah, no, it's no, interestingly, I have actually coming on the podcast in a week or two is Alex Robnett.
Jim Robnett's son.
Jim Robnett's son, who actually is involved in blockchain for legitimate companies who and interestingly, he and I were talking about, I've asked him to come on because there are a lot of legitimate uses for this. Like I'll give you an example. I had a client that I brought into the for the FBAR, the offshore program, and was moving money constantly. And I remember asking why. He said, "You don't understand what it's like in this country." It was Ukraine. He said, "You can put your money in a bank at 9 a.m. and it could be gone at noon. There's no FDIC insurance in Ukraine." So with that in mind, I understand the attraction in some areas of the world to have Bitcoin, right? I believe theoretically it could be stolen. I think that's pretty difficult to do, my understanding of it. But I think actually in Silk Road, there's
a lot of hacked exchanges. I mean, there's I think probably the most publicized was this Mt. Gox, where they, so it is stolen. It's hacked. Not only is it's stolen and hacked, people lose their private keys. I don't know. Did you see the story recently about the gentleman? I forget what state, but he had X number of Bitcoin that was on his old laptop worth now, hundreds of millions of dollars. And he was trying to pay that city landfill to be able to go search for his old laptop. And they denied his request. But if you lose your private key, there's no way to get it back. So there's a sizable amount that's either hacked or people lost their private key.
But and I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole, but it strikes me as my understanding is it's like a giant ledger with all these different almost bookkeepers keeping track. How do you steal it? I mean, it's got to go somewhere. I think it's my lack of understanding, obviously. I mean, there are obviously criminals who are smarter than I am who figure this out. But it strikes me as it would be like trying to steal it in an accounting ledger. I can move it somewhere, but there's a clear, I don't know. But I do see that the positive, the valid uses for a virtual currency. And we know about, I had Steve Tosher and Mike Stein on a couple times talking about the taxability of it, that it's viewed as an asset, right? So if you sell it, you have income. You now have to report it, I believe, on the 1040, right this year. It was actually right. I
And
think.
last year, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, right at toward the top of the 1040 is the
Right.
virtual currency, which should, by the way, be an indicator of how important the government is taking this. That they slapped it on the top of the first page of the 1040. For those people who do have virtual currency, they may have had no reason to do anything as far as the government. They haven't sold it, they bought it, and they're holding it. Is there anything those people should be doing?
Larry, you want to cover that? Just talk about FAQ 5 and that uncertainty there.
Sure. And I had just a bit of a glitch there, a slight pause, but I think if the discussion is how to respond to the question on the 2020 tax return that asked whether the taxpayer transacted in virtual currency, Eric, you're exactly right that question has moved to the top of the Form 1040. And there are a number of taxpayers that are newly getting into crypto as an asset class, as an investment. The question naturally arises, to what extent should you or do you have to check the box yes or no? And the IRS has issued frequently asked questions in March of this year, in which it stated, look, if all you did as a taxpayer is purchase cryptocurrency, but you didn't sell, you didn't exchange, you didn't trade, then you should check that box no on the Form 2020. And I think there's a natural tension in there, right? Because we see the question on the form, and it's very logical, right? It asks whether you acquired virtual currency. And you would think of acquire as purchase, right? Did you get it? Whether you got it by gift or by purchase or however. And the IRS is taking acquired to not apply in the traditional sense. The issue that I think taxpayers run into is they're not entitled to rely on frequently asked questions, right? The IRS publishes them. They haven't been gone through the Administrative Procedures Act. They haven't complied with any of the requirements that apply when the IRS issues guidance. So if for some reason the IRS recants its position in the FAQ, and they say you weren't entitled to rely on that taxpayer, you should have answered yes. Well, now the taxpayer has potentially made a false statement on the tax return. So I think the good way to handle that is to truthfully answer the question as it's being posed, and indicate in a disclosure statement or otherwise attached to the tax return that the taxpayer merely purchased virtual currency. And even though technically not required to disclose or to check yes, as indicated in FAQ 5, the taxpayer is doing so to discharge his or her legal obligation. The corollary could probably also be said true, that the taxpayer could check the box no, and state that the taxpayer disclosed that the taxpayer did purchase virtual currency and is checking the box no, consistent with FAQ 5. Again, to undermine any claim from the government at a future point in time that the taxpayer intentionally violated legal duty.
Well, and I agree. On the defense side, that's what we're always worried about. You'd rather be ultra conservative to try to take the wind out of although I would think that if you said no, you relied on FAQ 5, at least from a criminal perspective, even though you couldn't rely on it, I think that the government would have a difficult time criminally going after you. However, I tend to agree with you, Larry. And if people were listening saying, I got clients, I kind of agree. If you're going to rely on FAQ 5, you can still check no, but you may want to do the attachment. Say, hey, look, we did purchase it, or it was, I don't know, I guess transferred to me somehow. But I am checking the box no, pursuant, in relying on FAQ 5, but do want to let the government know that I have it. To me, because I do so much collection work, offers and compromise and whatnot, we are now requiring clients to check a box yes or no. Have they had it in the last, I think it's 6 years? And, it just have they had it? Because that is what is going on is of concern. And Dawn, on that note, we know what the government is doing, as you said. They're getting the information. They can compare to returns. In the collection arena, they can look at 433s that were submitted with offers and compromise, even bankruptcy schedules. If people filed bankruptcy and the IRS was on there as a creditor and alerted, did they list it in their schedules as an asset? So they're looking at all that. Do you think is there something else going on from the government side that we're not aware of? Well, there's a lot going on in the government we're not aware of.
You're talking about from the IRS standpoint, I'm assuming.
Yes.
Well, I think you touched on it, but it goes to the many discussions that I led and others continue to talk about in terms of data analytics. So I think that for practitioners and for taxpayers, there is so much analytical work going on at the IRS. It's not just the 433s. It's not just the things that you mentioned, but anywhere that they can feed this information into data analytics software. So whenever a return or a form is filed, it pings off of this data set, from John Doe Summonses and other information. They're going to use that. So as they get more information from John Doe Summonses, from other sources, completed cases, from you name it, informants, et cetera, it just builds that data set that the IRS has on individuals that may have transacted, and they'll put the pieces together much faster than they used to be able to. So I think that's just one example of many. I think that they're trying to leverage this information as deeply as they possibly can.
And Larry, actually, Don, the government is making so much use of data now. I'm sure you remember this. Go back, 10, 12 years, they couldn't match a K1 to a 1040. Mm-hmm. They can now.
Come a long way. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Come a long way.
On offers and compromise, we've gotten contacts by the government. We'd like the income of the other person in the household. What other person in the household? Call the client. They're like, oh yeah, my girlfriend moved in 3 months ago. How do they know that?
Yeah.
Postal database. DMV. I mean, the world is shrinking. Right. I think it's a great way to put it. And I don't think this is going to be the only area where we'll see John Doe summonses. The check cashers. You have FATCA. I can imagine some other areas will probably be ripe for this. But there's some pushback. Larry, this is what I wanted to get to. There was pushback. I think it was California is where Kraken is. The district court actually pushed back on the John Doe summons and wanted them to narrow it, or the government decided to narrow it. Larry, can you speak to what is going on there?
Sure. I think it's two pieces. I mean, the first piece that the court spoke to is the Taxpayer First Act of 2019 imposed additional requirements when the IRS issues a John Doe summons, and it specifically required that the John Doe summons be narrowly tailored, quote unquote, narrowly tailored to achieve its objectives. And some courts, and specifically the Northern District of California, like you noted, Eric, have expressed concern that in issuing these John Doe summonses, the IRS is not satisfying that narrowly tailored requirement. The specific concern that the court noted in Kraken was a request for all correspondence, all chats, all inquiries, and the like by users within that class of people, whoever those people may be. And if you kind of think that as an exchange, you're getting that request from the government, you say, wow, that's a really broad request. And I think the concern from the court is that might be burdensome on a third party in complying in situations where it's not even known if there are instances of tax noncompliance or tax evasion. The interesting thing is that the government's response to the show cause order in Kraken that Don mentioned before specifically states that the IRS takes the position, or the Department of Justice takes the position, that the request was narrowly tailored. Nevertheless, I think in an effort to appease the court's concern, DOJ and the IRS voluntarily retracted the request to not capture all of that information, all correspondence, all chats, all inquiries. So I think what you're seeing is the age-old concern that the government is powerful, especially in terms of its power to issue John Doe summonses, and courts are trying to put a check on the power.
So are you guys getting, I'm curious, have you seen clients coming in because of this?
because of the John Doe summons?
Well, actually, I was just thinking about just the whole virtual currency, and the reason I ask is I've had over the last year about 4 or 5 audits where cryptocurrency was either the only thing or one of the only things that the auditor wanted to ask about, and inevitably the client told us, "Yeah, I did have Bitcoin," and my assumption is that was information the government obviously got from the Coinbase or possibly other places, but it certainly got the information either from the John Doe summons or from audits of other people. I'm just curious what you're seeing. I mean, Don, you're in DC, although I mean you do work everywhere.
Yeah.
And Larry, and you're in New York. I mean, are you guys seeing this or other things from the virtual currency?
Yeah, and I'll let Larry answer also, but the answer is yes. I mean, we've got a number of attorneys that have clients in this area, and I think what's also interesting is one or more clients that I think are nervous because they've heard everything that's been publicized, and you hear people talking about it, and you maybe have some issues that are coming forward. So not just directly related to an audit, but people that are thinking, what are my options here, in terms of voluntary disclosure and other options, and what does the government know and what may they know? So yes, we have had some clients. Larry?
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. We have had taxpayers that or clients who've come in proactively to try and head these issues off before the IRS, pursues them, opens an audit, opens an investigation. We've also dealt with clients who are, beyond the grand jury investigation phase, right? I mean, they are approaching sentencing at this point. So yeah, we're seeing a lot of enforcement activity in this area.
Yeah, it's interesting, Eric, if I could just add, I think, because I have a good perspective on this, having left the government and now in private industry. If you don't like actively live and transact in this cryptocurrency space, and you were just happen to be reading the paper or whatever, a casual observer would think that by definition cryptocurrency is illegal, right? If you look at some of the statements of, I think of the statements of the prior Secretary of the Treasury, Mnuchin, spoke a number of times about illicit activity in the crypto space, and Secretary Yellen, in her confirmation hearing, and then after that, kind of referred to the illegality of it, and I think that's something that I had to constantly remind myself of, that it's like 1% that's illicitly used, and there are it is becoming more mainstream. But I think you gave a great example of in Ukraine, right, where the bank may fail and there's real reasons to do it. I like to think that there's your bank, my Bank of America is not going to fail, hopefully, so I'm safe in my bank account. But it is, I think, becoming more and more mainstream. But the challenge is, and Don Fort's own personal opinion, as it stands right now, I don't think it gets mainstream enough that I start using a debit card that's connected to cryptocurrency as I similarly transact right now with my credit card, right? Because when I put, my wife and I charge everything on a credit card, so we can easily track everything and pay the bill monthly. That doesn't trigger a taxable transaction for me. But when people start, I'm not going to tomorrow start using a debit card connected to cryptocurrency, and at the end of the year have 8,000 taxable transactions. So I think that's the fascinating thing. Certainly becoming more mainstream, a lot of investment and institutional investment. But will it become mainstream such that people use it in place of their credit cards or cash?
Well, I think it is interesting because to my mind, Don, like you said, not only is it the taxable transactions, I'm not sure how much this is costing me day to day because of the fluctuation. To me, it would be like having a credit card attached to my stock account. I mean, I'd have to almost check the stock price to see if I want to pay for this or not, because cryptocurrency we saw fall, and I don't know where it is now, 50,000 a Bitcoin or something.
Yeah.
I mean,
there's a lot of examples if you just Google it of, early adopters to Bitcoin that bought in 8-9 years ago that would purchase something, pizza sandwiches for X number of Bitcoin, that if you use today's present value, bought pizzas for millions of dollars, which is in the fair market value of the Bitcoin today.
And then there's the gentleman that threw away the laptop and then threw away several hundred million of Bitcoin.
Right.
It's unbelievable. It is a little bit crazy. But so to wrap up, for those folks, Don and Don, you kind of already hit on this, and Larry, I think both of you hit on this. For folks who have this, who have transacted, bought, sold, used it to pay for things, who have not reported it, I think we know the answer to this, but what are you advising your clients, or if somebody has a client out there, what would you be advising them to do now?
Larry, why don't you start with that one?
Yeah. We absolutely advise them to make the IRS a priority and make an effort to get into compliance. Beyond that, we'll discuss with them their different options for coming into compliance. And it's not really a one-size-fits-all approach, right? Different taxpayers are at different stages in the investigatory process, right? I mean, some might not have an auditor investigation opened at all. Some might be the subject of a John Doe summons, such as Coinbase or Circle, and yet still others, there may have already been an audit or an investigation opened, and the IRS just hasn't yet contacted the taxpayer. So we are certainly advising taxpayers to come back into compliance and advising them that essentially, they have generally 5 options depending on where they are in the process, right? For your taxpayers who acted willfully, right? Those are taxpayers who transacted in cryptocurrency and they intentionally did not report their tax obligations related to those transactions. We are advising those taxpayers to consider a voluntary disclosure, or may advise them to consider a voluntary disclosure. The IRS recently updated its voluntary disclosure practice and has created a separate disclosure process for cryptocurrency and virtual currency. So that would be option 1, come in through the front door through a formal voluntary disclosure program. Option 2 would be to get right with your tax obligations through the back door. All right. And those would be for taxpayers who acted willfully. These are taxpayers who transacted in virtual currency and intentionally did not report the associated tax with those transactions. For those taxpayers, they have the option of making a quiet disclosure. That is, filing amended tax returns, reporting and paying any additional tax due, and essentially waiting or hoping that the IRS doesn't audit those tax returns or open an investigation into the taxpayer. Option 3, those are for taxpayers who did not act willfully and who are not wrapped up in a John Doe summons, whether it's the Coinbase summons, the Circle summons, the Kraken summons. Those taxpayers have the additional option of filing an amended tax return that is known as a qualified amended tax return. And the benefit of a qualified amended tax return is that the taxpayer generally would not be subject to accuracy-related penalties from the original return. So that would be option 3. Option 4 is always an option, and that is do nothing. And then I would say the last option is it depends. It's murky. You are wrapped up in a John Doe summons. You might be wrapped up in a John Doe summons. And those are the issues where a deeper dive needs to occur. But for all of these taxpayers, there is a path forward. It's just a question of what the right path forward is.
And I'll just add the path narrows significantly if your name is turned over as part of a John Doe summons. So like Larry said, today you may have 5 options. Those a number of those fall off the table if Kraken or Circle turns your name and identifiers over to the government. You won't be that will no longer be an option for you. So.
No, I think I would imagine if you are someone with Kraken or Circle and you have been transacting and not reporting, I would get my pre-clearance request in today. In fact, now. it would be, I'd have my facts going over for voluntary disclosure, the new form they have, or the new one they put together for virtual currency, which is, I'll try to put a link in the description. I'll also put a link in the description for those of you who want to contact Don or Larry. You can get a hold of them. That'll be in the description as well. Listen, guys, thanks for taking the time. Oh, and one more thing. For those listening, what prompted this is, once the kind of John Doe summons hit the news, you guys are way more on top of this than we are. Larry and Don had an article come out. I got it in the KNF newsletter. And I will put a link to that as well. So people who want to go and read the article, that'll be there. All right. But otherwise, guys, listen, thank you for taking the time. I will probably have you back because I think this is the next year or so. This is going to be interesting. And I think there'll be more. I think they're going to see other exchanges and more John Doe summonses.
Appreciate you having us on, and we'd be happy to come back. Thanks a lot, Eric.
Yeah, Eric, thank you so much.
All right, guys. Thanks. And everyone, have a great day. Thanks for listening. And see you next week.